Final speaker for today is Quinn Reinders, Executive Director, Forensic Services at BDO. Quinn describes herself as a problem solver who likes to think about what challenges tomorrow might bring so they can be reframed as opportunities for today. She will reveal the key ingredients of collaboration in an e-discovery context and what the future might hold. Over to you, Quinn.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for attending, and thank you very much, Sarah, for that very interesting presentation. It was great to hear from your side of things, the scientific lens of multidisciplinary collaboration, and I hope what I will add today is the very practical lens from being the doer of e-discovery projects for the last 16 years. You may still wonder why we are talking about this, and it would seem that everyone would collaborate and do these e-discovery projects in this way as a matter of course. After all, they've been around for a long time. However, through my day-to-day work, I can confirm that that's not the case. The importance of collaboration has been known to man since ancient times. As the oldest humans in Africa already knew, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you need to go together. I'll be talking some more about the lessons that I've learned in the past 16 years in terms of collaboration in e-discovery, and in particular, why this is sometimes harder than it sounds. And I'll also share what you can do about that. The need for collaboration actually arises pretty early on in the process, precisely when a regulatory or legal notice or request for discovery is made. For simplicity, I'll refer to this as a request in the course of this presentation. Often, when a request is received, the recipient can feel the need for a magic button, since the requests can be very broadly worded and the timeframes are usually extremely tight. But if only it were this simple.
Could I call you right back?
Good afternoon, Bob. I was wondering if I could have $500,000 to upgrade our call center technology.
Well, sure. In fact, I think I'll just give you the cash.
Thank you. Nice.
Stanley, stop goofing off, okay? I need you to work. I need you to work. You got me?
Oh, Jim, hi. Hey, listen, I need you to find a way to connect our two contact centers with the ones from the new acquisition. Can you handle that for me?
Well, of course. I can flip the switch, have it done right now.
Knew you could.
Done.
Great. Oh, and I'm out of M&Ms. Could you bring me a pack of those, too?
Excuse me?
Hey, Bill. The CEO's ordered a new green initiative. Wants half of our contact center staff to work from home. Think you could set that up?
No problem. That should just take a second. There you go.
You the man.
If only it were that simple.
Nice work.
Yeah, so to prevent this, as is shown in the picture, from happening, collaboration on the request is actually the very first step. It's a shame we don't have a magic button, but it's important for both sides to really listen in order to avoid the face value problem. Too often, instructions are thought of in isolation and from one viewpoint only. And value is missed, reputation lost, and cost savings aren't realized if instructions are taken on face value. For example, I've seen thousands of documents reviewed for irrelevant or badly defined search parameters. Such a waste. Productions made to regulators that aren't compliant with protocols, with the scrutiny as a result over everything else that happens subsequently. Data sources missed altogether, or massive overcollection and waste of time and money and effort is another risk. The picture on this slide represents what a disconnected e-discovery project feels like to me. It's a shame we can't reflect on this together in person today, as I'm sure we could share many a good war story about it. And this is exactly where Sarah was right, and it pays off for the recipient to link with external or internal legal counsel and also with IT, compliance professionals, project management professionals, e-discovery professionals, internal, external people, and others that are relevant party to the request. All while often needing to keep knowledge of the request on a strict as needs basis, obviously, because many of these projects are. So it is a challenging balance to walk, and it's like a form of art. However, it will be worth it to set the e-discovery project up for success. So further to some of my critical success factors. Once the request is understood and relevant questions have been gathered by all the parties, the recipient can reach back out to the sender and confirm the request, ask any further questions, apply for extensions as necessary and appropriate. During the course of an e-discovery project, there are a few key success factors that I would like to emphasize. In my experience, things will go wrong if any of the following happens. 1. People on the project team communicate solely or mostly via email, instant message, or dysfunctional 100-people conference calls. 2. There's too little or too much trust between people on the project team, and I can explain more on this later. 3. People on the project team don't speak the same language, and nothing is done about it to manage this. Regarding the mode of communication, an experienced project manager will know this. However, getting the cadence and mode of communication right is a key success factor. So a quick email or instant message can be easy and on face value, again, time saving. But words, according to research, only make up 7% of communication overall. And therefore, if all communications are written, a lot will be missed. A successful e-discovery project will allow key individuals to connect face-to-face via phone or via video link, whilst decision-making processes are efficiently streamlined and recorded. This helps with accountability and transparency, particularly in those processes that take years to complete, and as a source of reference for key individuals on the project. On trust, it is critical, so important, but also a balance to walk. If you have too little of it, which is the obvious issue that people tend to refer to for trust, second guessing will lead to double workloads and to delays. But on the other side, if there's too much trust, there's a lack of asking of the right questions of key individuals, and confirmation bias might start to play a big role. And this can be really crucial because, just like Sarah pointed out during the last presentation, it's that multitude of viewpoints that do not necessarily each other, that trust each other, but not too much, that will actually ultimately drive the value and the success of an e-discovery project. So during a well-structured e-discovery project, there should be enough trust to enable key individuals to do their jobs with adequate levels of independence and accountability, without being hamstrung by bureaucracy. Yet the relevant challenging question should be asked, and process and output should be reviewed as appropriate to challenge the results before production. The last point that I was making is around the language. And there's a funny tweet on the right on the slide, which shows some modern buzzwords that are thrown around quite easily. And there's heaps of these buzzwords in the e-discovery industry alone. It's dangerous because you don't want to look weak and ask a dumb question necessarily. But it's important with the right level of trust to make sure that everyone understands what discussions are about. So you need to think about that proactively, particularly with more junior participants and team members. So for me, this is what I'm quite passionate about because it embodies my role often on large projects. As a finance professional in 2006, I was hired into an e-discovery team to be the human interface between techies and commercial and legal stakeholders. I often say I translate bits and bytes into debits and credits. Not every project is of the complexity or the size that a human interface is needed at all time. However, even involvement in a meeting here or there, like at the scoping at the start or the output review at the end, can make a world of difference to project success and prevent misalignment in terminology used and professional practice to get in the way of delivering good results. So to recap, my 3 critical success factors is to limit email and purely written communication channels, particularly as a sole form of interaction, to establish justified trust levels, and to work on speaking each other's language and creating a really open way to collaborate and making sure that everyone understands each other as a multidisciplinary team. A final note on critical success factors in e-discovery collaboration is to be cognizant of how e-discovery familiarity still differs between advanced users and others in terms of the process. It might be helpful to think of these 3 factors more on a sort of continuum basis. In some teams that are relatively inexperienced, the default position should be to invest heavily in all these 3 factors, particularly for a complex and a longer process. Very process experienced teams and technology experienced teams, on the other hand, might only need a very light touch approach. Still, it's good to consciously evaluate these 3 items to make sure that, again, it's not overlooked just because there's an assumption that everyone should know or would know how to do certain things. Then over to a concrete example in collaboration. I'm a firm believer that it's the key to avoid cost and time blowing out and reputation damage. I've, for various periods in my career, worked on scenarios like this. Usually for a big bank, various regulators across the globe issuing multiple notices in multiple jurisdictions, multiple professional services firms having to collaborate with multiple law firms on a single e-discovery project. This is potentially a disaster scenario, and I've seen this play out in potentially really bad ways. But I also have experienced really, really good outcomes when the collaboration was front and center for the team, and everyone needs to participate. In a particular Australian situation in the last 5 years, at the outset, everyone was quite worried how it would go, particularly because the regulatory industry in Australia is a little bit less mature than it is elsewhere in the globe. There were a lot of worries at the professional services firm that I was working at the time that it would turn into, in more polite version of the term, a peeing contest between the professional services firms and the law firms involved. Would we start to compete? Could we get processes watertight between the jurisdictions, which was particularly important as the regulators were also increasingly cooperating and were expecting this of us? Could sovereignty appropriately between all the jurisdictions? Could we do all of that whilst meeting the various deadlines and without anything falling between the cracks? In the end, we managed to do this, and that was largely because we paid attention to these communication structures, creating these formal decision-making communication structures and records where necessary, but not everywhere, and also establishing these informal link-ups at all the different levels. So the partners would have them, but also at the more junior levels, people were free to collaborate and to make sure that everyone was suitably set up to do their job appropriately. Ultimately, all deadlines were met. It was a success story. The fine was there, but it was much more limited than it could have been had the scenario turned out differently. So we had structured meetings and calls and decision making. Everyone realized they held part of the solution. We tried to limit hidden agendas as much as possible. We openly discussed dilemmas, and we established the relationships at all levels, not just partner or exec levels. Then, today, I've seen many great new legal technologies in the expos and in the presentations. And just one final thought also about collaboration. Quite often, lawyers tend to think in terms of one technology can do this one thing, or there's one solution that provides for this certain output. And it's probably a byproduct of analytical and logical thinking. And I must admit that as an accountant myself, I can relate to it. However, over the years, I've seen technology used for multiple different output opportunities. And I think it's very important that we're aware of this kind of occupational bias confirmation, and that we, as we're aware of it, we can open ourselves up to more opportunities in the collaboration, both in the process and the technology. So where we sometimes tend to think of a tool only for a specific area of expertise or a limited capacity, it might limit opportunity. And together we can achieve a lot that we set our mind to, and problems get solved way better through a legal lens, through a multitude of lenses than through a legal lens in isolation. So what I've seen e-discovery technology used for is mergers, data separations, restructures, IP issues, and even tax R&D claims I've seen made successfully through the use of e-discovery technology. And it can all be better supported, especially when we power it with collaboration. Then one other theme that I'm passionate about, it's the future. Because I believe if you don't think about the future, at some point you'll fall hopelessly behind because things are moving so quickly. As we heard from the first speaker in the slot, his company has thousands of SaaS contracts, and they now need technological solutions to manage these. So one might wonder, where is this all heading? Well, it sounds like it's heading to the cloud. So what does collaboration look like when everything is in the cloud? An obvious prediction is that it will limit the time and the cost relative to the data volume, which is quite good because data volumes are ever growing. So we need a better way to deal with them. It will also change the approach to collections as the first step in the e-discovery process. We've seen this quite extensively over the last year already, with COVID throwing a spanner in the wheels. And I guess, like any industry, the e-discovery industry probably could have made this advancement quicker, but it was COVID as the imperative that has spurred us to rethink our approaches and to really explore possibilities of doing things remotely. So as a result of COVID, we're now actually, even in New South Wales, where I am, we're allowed to go back on most sites again to do things still remotely, collect remotely via scripts where we can, because it is much more efficient and it is much cheaper. And the move to cloud that many companies have made largely enables this. Cloud will likely also mean convergence to the infrastructure of a few large providers. Already, we're seeing a lot of companies at least sort of make a half move to Amazon, to AWS. And if you think about it from their perspective, you can see that they will ultimately, if this continues, hold a lot of the world's data in terms of the infrastructure layer. So will that make e-discovery easier? Well, no one has 100% of the answer to that question, but I think there's two ways to look at it. Yes, it will most definitely make it easier from a standpoint of where the data is held, like in terms of the physical location, although obviously with cloud it is dispersed, but at least it's infrastructure controlled by one party. And there will likely be some more uniformity in the format, particularly of the logging. Probably not from the perspective of roles and responsibilities, accessibility and retention, because a lot of that still sits with the company. And I do predict that there will be a lot of confusion when companies move to the cloud as to who will define certain things, and dumpster settings, retention policies, anything relevant to e-discovery projects, and we will run into scenarios where we think we can collect certain things and we can't because it's simply not available due to the fact that it's fallen between the cracks of the infrastructure provider and the actual company. So I think it will make it easier in some respects and harder in some respects. Another question is, will e-discovery be a process hosted inside an organization entirely? Will jobs like the one I'm currently in still exist? Maybe, maybe not. I think that there is a high likelihood that e-discovery software capability might integrate in certain bigger enterprise suites like Microsoft. It already begun, so my expectation is that it will continue. But whether all specialist functionality of like that the bigger industry leading platforms hold at the moment, such as Relativity, will completely be available to everyone through standard software, I think that chance is pretty remote. Also, in certain scenarios, there's probably still a requirement for independent review, independent experts, due to conflict of interest or certain legal requirements. So that will probably always require a cohort of external providers to exist. And regardless, even if I'm wrong and everyone will move over client side, there will always be a need to employ technical professionals that know how to work with the tools, as well as the people that sit between them and commercial people, the interpreters like myself. So on that more hopeful note, I would like to end my talk today. I've got my, oh, that went a bit too quick. I've got my on this final slide. Please feel free to jot down my mobile number, look me up on LinkedIn, or maybe we'll chat on the event platform. And hopefully soon or next year on AltaCon, we'll get to meet in person.